This presentation is on an exploratory study of athletes and classifiers' understanding of and experience with classification in parasport. My name is Janet Lawson, and I would like to acknowledge my co-authors, Dr. Tony Williams and Dr. Amy Latimer-Chung. Classification is a system of organizing competition which groups athletes together with similar functional abilities. To be classified, athletes must have one of 10 eligible impairments and undergo a series of assessments. Following these assessments, athletes are assigned a sport class. To date, most literature focused on classification has pertained to the development and validation of evidence-based classification procedures. With this, limited work has examined experiential aspects of classification. That which has, however, shows us that athletes often report their experiences negatively, while it describes classifiers' roles as being to classify fairly and in a detached manner, and to use allocative and authoritative control in order to do so. This study sought to explore athletes and classifiers' experiences with classification, and was driven by the research questions: how do athletes and classifiers understand their experiences, and what does a typical classification experience look like? To achieve these aims, 18 athletes, all of whom were Canadian, and 8 classifiers, who represented an international sample, were recruited to participate in semi-structured interviews. This group represented both team and individual sports, as well as summer and winter sports. Further demographic information has been withheld in order to protect participants' anonymity. The study design was guided by hermeneutic phenomenology. Thus, a focus was placed on both how participants described their experiences as well as the experience itself. Hermeneutic phenomenology assumes it is impossible to completely distance oneself from one's research, and so an interpretivist paradigm was adopted. Additionally, rigor was assessed through the use of transparency, reflective practices, and intentional communication. Finally, analysis was done through the hermeneutic circle, that is, an iterative process of reading, reflective writing, and interpreting. The analysis showed that athletes and classifiers experience classification one of 3 ways. First is neutral. Neutral experiences were considered mundane. For example, one participant said, "My classification was never an experience that was like a major experience or turning point or major decision point. It was just a part of the process along the way." Others experienced classification negatively. For instance, when classifiers did not follow standard procedures or questioned an athlete's abilities, they implied that they believed the athlete to be intentionally misrepresenting their ability, and athletes in these situations felt mistreated and questioned the objectivity of the classification system. Lastly, athletes and classifiers described positive experiences, similarly to neutral experiences. However, these experiences were made explicitly positive when contrasted with a prior negative experience. Notably, this negative experience did not have to be the participant's own. For example, athletes who had heard negative stories about classification prior to going through it themselves described their classifications positively, similar to those who had had multiple negative experiences prior to a positive experience. Results also showed that participants understood classification multiple ways. For example, by reflecting on themselves, athletes were able to develop an idea of the classification they may receive and to explain their classification once it was assigned. Additionally, athletes' sense of identity was impacted by their classification. Classifiers also reflected on their own skill in order to make decisions about the classification to be assigned. Additionally, classifiers gained entry into a unique community and described experiencing a unique sense of self when participating in classification. Athlete-classifier interactions were also used to understand classification. Classifiers were viewed by athletes as being the gatekeepers of parasport. whereas athletes were viewed by classifiers as being in need of classifiers in order to gain entry to sport and to receive a competitive advantage as a result of their classification. The classification system itself was also used to explain athletes' choice of sport and the outcome of classifications. The results of this study show that positive experiences should not be idealized as they require prior exposure to a negative experience. Furthermore, negative feelings of surveillance were not shown to be as common as they may previously have been thought to be. Additionally, athletes' perceptions of a classifier's skill or level of knowledge was shown to greatly influence their perceived experience quality. Lastly, athletes and classifiers' way of understanding was shown to be underpinned by the medical model of disability and medicalized knowledge. This is important as it may inform how future interventions aimed at improving classification and improving participants' understanding of classification are developed. Thank you for listening.